What are you doing?
I'm using my psychic powers to go live. Oh, we're live. Hey,
it worked.
It worked.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, and welcome to the Three Ravens Book Club live stream for our May to June book. That's what?
The Familiar.
Leigh Bardugo's
The
Familiar. I don't know if it appears backwards.
We're backwards.
Maybe.
So maybe.
Know. There's something to do with science or physics or technology that I don't really understand. Anyway, hello, and we hope you enjoyed this book.
Yes.
I mean, Eleanor,
I absolutely
loved
this book.
Yeah.
So I was really, really excited to bring this one to book club and see what other people thought of it too.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to keep the format fairly similar to before, which is we're going to throw out some questions. Hope people can respond to those in the chat and contribute their thoughts to them as people join the chat and drop in and out, which is what happened last time. Keep throwing questions in, and we'll keep throwing questions in, and people just keep adding stuff to the conversation. So the general question to start off with was, how did you feel about this book? Did you enjoy it? So, do feel free to comment in the box.
Well, for me,
how are you feeling?
That is a resounding yes.
Yeah.
I've got to say, I mean, I said this on the podcast already, but I picked up this book thinking, I'll just start it. It was a Sunday morning, and I read the entire thing in one sitting. I mean, Martin had to sort of drag it off me so he could make me breakfast and force me to eat. But other than that, it was pretty much cover to cover, one sitting.
Yeah.
Wouldn't put it down, went in the bathroom with it, had a bath fully reading it. And yeah, it took me probably about 5 hours to read the entire book.
Yeah,
I'm quite a quick reader, but it is a testament to how much I wanted to find out what was going to happen. So I thoroughly enjoyed this one. Bit of a change from last month's book club book for me, which I didn't quite enjoy as much, shall we say.
and also for context, like Eleanor is in another book club with friends, and the book that she was reading with her friend's book club this month, you didn't even finish, right?
I have struggled, and we have actually rescheduled the book club because I wasn't the only one who didn't finish. None of us, we were all really struggling with it. So we're going to push that back for another week or so.
So would you go so far as to say it was an easy read?
Absolutely. Yeah. The only thing that was hard was having to stop reading it.
Elaine has commented, I really enjoyed it too. Good. And like Elaine, anyone else who joins in with the chat, had you read any other Leigh Bardugo books? And I'm asking this question directing it at you, Eleanor, because I know you have read one or two.
Well, I think if you look in the front, I think I've read nearly all of her books. I think there's a couple I might not have read, but I've certainly read the Shadow and Bone, the Grisha series, and the Six of Crows duology. And I've read the first book in her Dark Academia series, The Ninth House. I haven't read Hellbent, which is the second one of that yet.
King of Scars?
No, so that's the other duology I've not read. So I'd say I'm like almost read all of her books.
Yeah, you're not like the most super hardcore fan, but you're a fan. We can definitely say that.
Yeah, I can definitely say that. And I think this book, The Familiar, probably made me more hardcore a fan because it feels like it was more for me.
Yeah, and you came out of this saying you thought this was her best book.
Yes. For my money, absolutely. And that's not to say that her other books aren't very good. I mean, I read the Grisha trilogy when I was, well, I suppose it was probably about 12, 15 years ago, must have been when it came out. So much more within that kind of young adult, new adult reading age bracket, I suppose.
And with the Familiar, that's the next question to kind of throw into the gumbo pot is, who do you think this book is for? Is it a YA? Is it a young adult? Or is it a book for grown-ups?
I would say it's a book for grown-ups because for me, that's a historical novel. It's a very well-researched historical novel, which is quite rich in its portrayal both of Inquisition-era Spain in the 1500s and of the experience of the Jewish diaspora in hiding within that space at the time. So for me, it feels like a historical novel that also has magic in and the kind of romance that I would expect to read. And to me, it feels like some of the tropes I like from young adult romance are in there, but they feel a little bit more grown up.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit more adult material in there. It's a little bit more explicit, which just it feels perfectly right for the book. It wasn't gratuitous or anything. But yeah, I think it's for grown-ups.
Yeah. So the book's for grown-ups, and maybe that's part of why you felt a little bit more with it than other, like some of the other books that you've read recently in the fantasy space, but also I think within her own writing. Because like the Grisha trilogy books, I didn't read them when I was young enough. The Six of Crow books, I was a bit too old for them, I think.
Yeah, and those are, I would say, Bildungsroman. You
Yeah.
know, they are young adult protagonists, like Alina Starkov in The Shadow and Bone in the Grisha trilogy. She's like 17 years old. She's that classic sort of young adult heroine age, whereas Lithia in The Familiar is a little bit older. I mean, she's not in her 30s, she's in her mid-20s, but she's still a bit more of an adult. And due to the way her life has been, she's had to grow up pretty fast.
Yeah.
She's a smart adult woman.
And so in terms of favorite characters then, based on last month's book club, that was one of the questions that we spoke about. Who was your favorite character and why? And this is obviously for the chat as well, if anyone has feelings.
Tell us who your favorite is.
Who's your favorite character and why? And do you have any other character reflections? So just general thoughts on the characters in the book. And if you want to also address the next question while you're thinking, it's what was your favorite scene and why? So favorite character and why, any other character reflections, and then favorite scene and why. So for you, Eleanor, favorite character?
I'm struggling.
Is it a bit of a giveaway one?
I'm struggling.
Does it have to be Lucia?
I liked a lot of the characters in the book. There's some really rich characters. There's loads of interesting and different female characters, which was great. I liked Luthia a lot. I definitely found her easy to identify with. She is a person who's kind of had to hide her light under a bushel, and she has kind of had to keep quiet and keep herself down for quite a long time, but she struggles with it, and sometimes it just bursts out in flashes that she's actually quite smart, she's educated, she's not all she appears. And then the Luthia that comes out in those moments is someone who's really likable, she's really interesting, and you can see why he falls in love with her. But having said that, I do also really love the love interest character, the immortal demon, Guillaume Santangel. He is a fantastic character, totally fanciable, which you need in a romance. Their romance feels believable. There's a hint of kind of, isn't he going to betray her? But you can see the love sort of blossoming between them throughout. I think it's a lovely relationship.
And I think that, I've not read the book, right? So I'm saying this from the perspective of somebody who doesn't know that much about it. Am I right in thinking that because he's not human, that adds a classic fantasy romance element to it? If you think about a lot of fantasy books, there's very often a male wizard or someone who's powerful. I'm thinking about something like Uprooted, which right now is or it nearly made it to our book club pick for next month. But in that one, again, you've got this kind of inhuman wizard and then a mortal girl, a mortal young woman. Can you fall in love with somebody who isn't quite human? How can you trust them? How can you get along with them?
Yeah, and with him, because he's immortal, sort of. How can you? Yeah.
And I think the idea of an immortal love interest can definitely veer into some disturbing and creepy territory. Like, I'm thinking about Twilight, right?
Well, the immortal love interest thing, the first thing that I think some people might find a bit of a turn off is the fact that, he's hundreds of years older than her.
Yeah.
Yes, I think you sort of have to just accept that with this genre. And personally, as a reader, I'm completely fine with it. I've read a lot of dynamics like that, I've written dynamics like that, and I don't mind it. But for some people, I do appreciate it can be off-putting. But I think it's also a problem that requires solving within the story, and if you don't solve the problem, that's not great either. I think she solves the problem really beautifully. The ending of the book is a lovely way to get around that for me.
Awesome.
Because it's not a permanent get out of jail card. It's like a time limited get around it.
Okay, well that's good.
Yeah, I think it was tidy.
I do get frustrated when you do have these romances where the man or male character, because they're not always human, but nonetheless the male character is this all-powerful immortal or vampire or whatever it might be. And they've got all these years of wisdom that their love interest doesn't have. And that power imbalance is not something that's ever dealt with. it's just accepted as almost aspirational, and I find that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little bit creepy.
Yeah.
Lufia is not a helpless person, though. She is a person with power in her own right. She has incredibly strong magical power, which he sort of is helping her uncover. And ultimately, it's he who ends up needing her.
Sure.
So I think it is balanced out a little bit more. And there's the whole like immortality for this character equals ennui. He's sick of life. He's thinking about trying to find ways to end his life, but he's still a bit too cowardly to pull it off. He describes life as extremely boring because the idea is he's served this same family. He's kind of indentured magically to this one family who he can't escape. But it's all the same, generation after generation of this family, and he's just seen it all get round and round and round. So the idea of him having loads of experience is sort of addressed in that the experiences haven't been that radically different. They've all been like, oh, it's the same old story.
And also it's left him jaded.
Very jaded and sick and like fading and a shadow of his former self, basically.
Because I always think that's interesting in a narrative, like the whole question of immortality. Like, would you want to live forever? I think it's a big question that a lot of people are like, yeah, I'd love to live forever, but I don't know. The notion for me of living too long, like life's special because it's short in a way, right? If you didn't have to worry about things like time or achieving things, I'm not sure how that would change me, but I think it would also really change me if everyone I loved kept dying. You know, it would wear me down, I think, emotionally, if I couldn't pass on and the people I loved were passing on.
Yes.
I always think back to Highlander, which is, you know, one of those great films. It's a terrible film in many regards, but I think it raises some wonderful issues. Highlander. I'm quite excited about the new Highlander film that they're making.
Yes.
Henry Cavill, Highlander, with the director from John Wick. Like,
it should be pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah, I mean, let's have a go at that. Why not? Anyway, okay, so favorite scene was the next thing we asked. And if people have recently joined the chat, just to say the questions we've thrown out is, in general, how did you feel about the book? Did you enjoy it? Please add thoughts into the chat box. Who do you think this book is for? YA, new adult, whatever. We concluded it was probably an adult book. Who was your favorite character and why? Any particular character reflections? And now, what was your favorite scene and why?
You've
already spoken about the ending being
I think the ending's probably my favorite scene, actually. But I also absolutely love the scene where it's like the climax, quite literally, of the romance. Well, it is a sex scene. It's a love scene, I suppose, but because they're these two incredibly powerful beings with these intense feelings for each other, it's described as everything around them starts kind of bursting into life. So like flowers start blooming, orange blossoms going crazy, other people in the place around them start having these feelings of love and kindness and intensity towards other people. It's just really beautiful. But yeah, I think the very end, the last scene, is my favorite.
And from what you were telling me, the book concludes with information about each of the characters' lives and like what's happened to them over the years.
Yeah, so it sort of wraps everyone's story up quite nicely at the end.
And did you think that the fates that they had worked for the narrative that she created?
Yeah. I think they were appropriate.
So we can say then that the book was a really solidly structured book and that she clearly had a plan. Everything kind of worked.
I would say so. Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's great.
It follows a really clear structure, and there are the big sort of set piece moments which you would expect from a sort of historical fantasy novel.
And do you think that people got what they deserved? Like, were there people who should have had worse fates? Would have been more interesting if they'd ended up getting different destinies? And likewise, were there people who deserved better fates that didn't get them?
Well, I think there's one. It's not at the end, but one of the characters, Lufia's aunt, she meets a sticky end sort of in the last quarter of the book, and I think that was hard because I really liked that character, and it was an unfair death. Yeah, she was a little bit ethically grey. She was kind of slightly cowardly and self-serving in many respects, but she ultimately, I don't think, deserved to get pushed in a river, which is what happened to her.
Right. Drowning.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a horrible way to go. Although they do say that, I mean, I don't know how they know this, but that when you're drowning, you experience something close to ecstasy.
Well, I hope that happened for her.
Yeah, so that could have like taken the edge off a little
Yeah.
bit. But otherwise, you feel like, you know, pretty much it landed where it should have.
Yeah, because the characters who are the villains, as it were, I like endings for villains where they don't necessarily just die.
Yeah.
I quite like endings where they have to live in their misery. It's like the worst suffering is just, you know, just being you and having to live with that.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I was quite satisfied by the ending for Fortune and Victor, who end up just being who they are.
Nice.
And it really sucking for them.
Okay, cool. So any character reflections, favorites, and favorite scenes, do whack them in the chat box. And also just general thoughts about the book. Moving on then, 3 big themes that are the kind of 3 ravens you want. Oh, Helen, I enjoyed the growth that the character Valentina had over the course of the book, becoming kinder and allowing her more open-minded nature to come through. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Valentina's role within the book, how would you summarize what Valentina was there to do?
She's a catalyst. She's an early game villain. She is so she's Luthia's employer at the start of the book, and she's like a lower middle class, dissatisfied housewife whose husband doesn't have enough money, so she's constantly like socially embarrassed. She doesn't have good clothes, she can't entertain, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And she's like mindlessly cruel to her staff, which is Luthia and the cook. She's just like casually finding reasons to be mean to them just because she's sort of bored and miserable herself. So she's like a low-key Billy to start off with. But she starts to suspect Luthier's got magic, and she catches her out. And she traps her basically. So she's smart enough to figure it out, and then she kind of backs her into a corner with it and says, okay, you've got to make me rich. You're gonna perform for me at my dinner parties, and you're gonna make me rich and popular. And she does, and it works. But then as things sort of spiral out of control and people who are much richer and more powerful than Valentina start to become interested, Valentina realizes she has completely lost control of the situation.
Right.
And things change for her. And she starts to actually befriend Luthia and become something of a confidant, someone who Luthia can actually trust. And she ends up definitely redeemed by the end.
Elaine has said that she loved Valentina too, so evidently a bit of a low-key hit character.
She's just really believable,
Lucia,
isn't she? She's not a saint. She's just like any of us would be if we had in a situation in life which we felt we were unable to escape from. We weren't happy. We've got this dissatisfying relationship. I think she is really human, and she's not a monster.
Okay, in terms of favorite scenes, well, wait, I'm just going to throw out next topic, just in case if people wanted to have a little think and maybe put some stuff in the chat. Big three ravens things. How do we feel about the folkiness level of the book and its folklore? How do we feel about how history is addressed in the book? And what about the magic system and how magic is addressed in the book? So any thoughts on folkiness, history, and magic, please pop them into the chat box. Going back to favorite scenes though, I loved all of the trials. Yes, that's more than one scene. What are the trials?
So the trials are big staged kind of competitions in which, so essentially it's set in the Inquisition, and King Philip is looking for, who's had a sort of drastic defeat in every area of the world stage, and is looking for people to perform these milagritos, so little miracles, but they have to be connected to Jesus. They're not magic, they are absolutely holy miracles.
Sure.
And the trials are a way of showing off what the contestants can do in a theatrical way. So however we may feel about the work of J.K. Rowling, it's very much the Triwizard Tournament, if you know what I mean. It's that kind of, okay, here's the what you must do, now do it in your own unique way, show off your skill. And there are 4 different contestants within the Milagritos.
Right. I mean, it's a classic, isn't it, of the fantasy genre?
Yeah.
I think particularly in recent times, whether it's like the Nevernight books, where like they're all structured into tournaments, or Scott Lynch, The Lies of Locke Lamora. I know
Yeah.
I use the same books because they're my favorite ones, but like very often there's a sense of, you know, a competition, and in a way fantasy books often become kind of like sports films.
Yeah, and this definitely has a sports film vibe to it. The first trial, the first kind of official trial, for instance, Luthia thinks she's not going to be able to win because somebody else steals her party piece.
Yeah.
But then she can win because she uses her unique knowledge, which nobody else possibly can have.
Right.
So it's like her secret skill
actually,
and in fact, what wins the competition is because she can read, and no one knows she can read.
Oh, nice. Because, you know, whenever this arises, whether it's on a TV show or a film or whatever, we'll look to each other and go, "It's a sports anime."
Martin loves the sports movies.
I do.
He's very happy for it.
Like, I know nothing about sports. I have no real interest in any of the ways that sports technically work. I don't watch football or anything like that. But I love a sports film.
For someone who doesn't really understand football, he watches a lot of shows about football.
Well, no, I don't. I watch one show about football. I watched Welcome to Wrexham. Oh, I watched Ted Lasso,
which I also watched.
Yeah, that was a great show. But, you know, like a film about, you know, like a golfer or a baseball person. I don't care about any of these sports, but it's that idea of the underdog, the person who somehow through grit, determination, and teamwork is going to succeed. I love a sports structure to anything.
Yeah, so there is a slight sports movie. I mean, yeah, you could definitely say that because Luthia has a team behind her. She's got like a manager. She's got a coach.
A surefire recipe for success.
Now you said it, it's there.
Yeah, great. So it is a sports anime. Excellent, good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you already like raised the topic of history. You know, we're talking at the moment about folkiness, history, and magic system. History-wise, the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not absolutely my area of expertise, although 16th and 17th century England, I would say, is.
Yeah.
But Spain, not so much. And it definitely inspired me to go and learn a little bit more about it, because I think I only really understand the broad brushstrokes of the Spanish Inquisition and then how it subsequently affected England with Mary Tudor, etc.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it seemed good to me. It's sort of this ever-present hovering threat. I knew a little bit about the auto de fe kind of culture. They would have these big sort of show trials where they would burn heretics and stuff like that. I know a little bit about that, mainly from Voltaire's Candide, actually.
Yeah.
That's how I know about that. But yeah, I feel that's like well portrayed in the book. I think for me, I found the fear of being discovered to be Jewish, to be very effective, and the fact that once she's in with the rich and powerful, they're able to pay to get her a proper lineage. So they get her the services of somebody called a lineagista who like fakes her heritage that's completely Spanish, you know, so she's able to pass and get into the king's tournament.
See, that's interesting. And that quest for legitimacy through bloodline, that's another curious fantasy trope.
Yeah.
Like it from a literary criticism perspective, as someone's like interested in like reading and analyzing fantasy books, one of the things that often comes out of them is this genetic elitism idea.
And obviously that's exactly that. It's not just genetics, religious elitism.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that comes back to early Christianity from a historical perspective, where blood, the body and blood of Christ. It was believed in sort of 9th century, this idea started, where through taking Holy Communion, the blood of Christ literally entered into Christians, and they then had purer blood, more Christian blood than all other different groupings culturally.
And while that is not explicit, I think the idea is there. I think she's captured a society which has kind of internalized that.
Yes, well, I think we all have to some extent,
to some extent,
right?
Sure.
I think it's interesting that she's addressed it in the book, because normally people would just let that be there, whether it is Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or like any of these big fantasy series. They almost all have this idea of elitism and blood and, you know, mud bloods and blah, blah, like all that sort of stuff, and intergenerational messed up stuff, you inheriting evil or inheriting good
or
qualities.
inheriting a magic slave that your great grandfather had, you know, which is what they've got in there, which Victor's family has.
And so when you think about the ending from that perspective, does Leigh Bardugo have anything to say about that, I guess, genealogical problem with society? I mean, she's already said that, like, our protagonist manages to circumvent it.
Yeah, but I think ultimately what she's coming out with is that in order to get away from it, you have to remove yourself from it and live outside of society.
Right.
Because by the end, they are separate from society.
Sure. So that's your solution,
ultimately,
is to no longer play the game.
Don't play the game. You can have love and happiness on your own terms, but you won't be able to participate in wider society.
That's interesting. I mean, I think that Renaissance Catholic Spanish Inquisition torture stuff, to me, is very interesting, but it's almost, I couldn't imagine a popular fiction book describing the horror of the kinds of things that they did.
I mean, she's not gratuitous with it, but she doesn't shy away from it either. So there is a scene as a section towards the end of the book where Lethea does get arrested by the Inquisition, and there is a torture scene. She gets questioned by them. So do other characters within the cell she's staying in. So, like, it's there. There's definitely violence in this book, which is relatively graphic, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so, we're just talking about history, folkiness and magic. Which would you like to talk about next?
Well, I think they're mingled because the magic system comes from folk belief. So essentially, Lethea uses old rhymes and songs and hints of storytelling from her kind of squashed down Jewish past.
Right.
And that's the form her magic takes. Like, she's got magic, like she's got magic power within her, but at the beginning of the book, she's only able to bring it out in these kind of little superstitious folk rhymes, which she sings. And she can do it without making any sound later on, but at the beginning, she's only able to do it by saying things. And I'm just paraphrasing here, but things like proverbs such as a stitch in time saves 9 to fix something that's broken.
With you.
Yeah, or
but that's an
a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. She doesn't use either of those, but to get more bread in her basket when she gets her bread.
Idiom or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I read an interview with Leigh Bardugo about this, and I think they are real idioms, songs, sayings that she used.
Sure. I mean, I think that sounds like an amazing idea for a magic system.
And it's in her bloodline. So Lethea's aunt also has very little bit of the same magic. She's able to do a little bit, but the idea is that she's nowhere near as powerful as Lethea. Like, she might be able to make one flower come out, and Lethea could make an entire vine full of grapes off season because she's got the power. And there's that hint of jealousy between Aunt Juliette and Lethea there.
That sounds really interesting. So hold on. Okay, if we're going to just loop back slightly to the genetics conundrum, why is Lethea so much stronger?
We're not told.
Okay.
She just has it.
Right, so it's just a quirk.
Yeah, it's a quirk. Like, in a sense, her mum was more powerful.
Right.
Her mum's died. Both her parents have died.
The old fantasy classic. Get rid of the
have
parents.
Their parents in a fantasy.
Kill the parents. Cinderella it.
Yeah, all the way.
And is there, to an extent, a degree of this book being, because just reading the descriptions that I read, it seemed like it was working in Cinderella territory.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially at the beginning, she's a scullery maid. She is Cinderella.
So she's
quite
at
literally.
Ashputtel.
Yeah, she absolutely is. She sleeps in the grocery cupboard. She is Cinderella. And yeah, she does to an extent have a transformation. Like, I mean, we all love a transformation montage. As fantasy readers, we all enjoy the dowdy heroine getting a nice dress and being suddenly very, very pretty.
Yeah.
Although most people say she's not very pretty, which is really nice, I think. I like a not instantly stunningly beautiful heroine.
Yeah.
But the love interest sees her as stunningly beautiful. That's good.
Yeah.
I like that. And there's a whole sort of transformation montage when they're talking about her hair. I love hair, so I was really excited by that bit.
Yeah, you always like a hair description.
She's got incredible hair, this woman. It's just so well described. It's lovely. It's called desert hair.
Desert hair.
Yeah, because it's like, it makes you think of heat and sand, and
nice.
It's huge. So much hair.
That's a cool idea.
I love hair.
Looping back to that magic system, that sounds very interesting to me, because it makes sense. Like it's a way of using what already exists, because we associate witches and wizards with rhyme and idioms and those kinds of bits of wisdom of being able to, as is appropriate to the situation, come out with a phrase that's apropos. So it's not that daft to think that those people do have a special power, you know?
Yeah, and there's a definite cunning folk aspect to what she does, coupled with a sort of real magic power that's within her.
So what we're concluding then is folkiness, strong,
high.
Magic system, clever and strong, and the history stuff, as far as we can tell,
I'd say strong.
Pretty strong.
I mean, somebody tell me there's something wrong with the history stuff. I couldn't have picked anything out.
That's interesting. Okay, great. One of the things that I think, if we return to last month's book, was conversations about style, right? Writing style. How did everybody feel about the writing style of this book? Was it appropriate for the story in terms of the style it was written in terms of tense, in terms of perspective? Was it easy to read? Was it appropriate? So kind of moving on to the style question, because Song of the Huntress,
we felt not.
Yeah, we were
the style
allied
alienated a lot of readers, including me.
They played up her plainness in her costume to set her apart from her flashy competitors.
Yeah,
that's interesting as well. I mean, you're obviously always interested in clothing as well, and clothing descriptions.
Yeah.
I think as you were reading this book, you were saying, "Oh, some of the clothing descriptions." You're into the imaginary costuming.
Yes, always into that. I like reading descriptions of clothes.
Yeah, great. So, writing style then. I mean, how would you describe the writing style of this book?
So for me, I am actually quite a critical reader when it comes to writing style. If something jars me out of my experience, I absolutely hate it.
Yeah.
So if a sentence kind of jolts me and I go, nope, that doesn't feel right, and I hate it. I didn't have that with this, so I wasn't jolted out of my fantasy adventure. And I'm a really lucky person in terms of reading, because I'm kind of the opposite of an fantastic in that when I read, I see a movie.
Yeah.
So I'm just completely in it. It's totally detailed. And I didn't get slapped out of it by anything. But I felt the descriptions were very lush and thus appropriate, because this world, I mean, if you're not familiar, and why would you be, with the world of 16th century Spain, actually that world can feel like a fantasy world. And in many ways, her descriptions make it a fantasy world. But I felt it was very sensory. You know, when Lithia's walking around the streets of Madrid, I feel like I know, I can smell everything, I can hear everything, I can taste what she's eating. It was very sensory in that respect, which I think is always going to be appropriate for a historical novel, because you need to be taken back to place.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, actually one of the ways Song of the Huntress failed for me, because I wasn't really carried to place.
Yeah, it was very hard to imagine where you were. I think, a lot of the time in that book,
and just what everyone was doing and what they were looking at and seeing.
And I think there is a real art, isn't there, to a lush description of a location. It does, imagery. I think for both of us is quite an important part of writing. But going back to your point about style and genre, in a way, we've said it before any number of times that actually historical fiction is fantasy fiction.
Well,
you're always
in a way, it has to be,
making up a world and kind of framing it in a way.
And you can use aspects of research, but ultimately what you envision is what you envision, isn't it?
I mean, I think the ultimate, kind of example of that in recent times is the Wolf Hall books, the Hilary Mantel books. A lot of people think, oh no, they're historical fiction. They might be, but they're also fantasy books.
Yeah, I mean, they're very well researched in terms of what events were and when they happened.
Yeah.
But Mantel's take on what happened around the events is very much her fantasy, and that is great, and they are great books.
And I think that he's also a kind of mage in the way that he navigates the world using words to manipulate people.
Sure.
I don't think.
Yeah, and C.J. Sampson's Matthew Shardlake novels, he's a cool action crime fighting hero, isn't he? Whereas in reality, that might not have quite happened for him. But
I listened to both on Audible, so both of the books we've done for book club, and just couldn't get into The Huntress, but was totally engrossed in The Familiar. The language really inspired, visuals very strongly. So again, that sense of a strong visual
I
element.
really agree with you.
And in terms of those other things like tense and perspective, how does Leigh Bardugo approach them in this book? Is it just that
historic third person?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the safest mode
yeah, it is.
in which to write, isn't it? You know, third
It
person and past tense.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of can't go wrong. When you start messing with that as a form, I think it starts to get more difficult. And in terms of narrator's voice, like, was the narrator a strong voice?
No, the narrator's a very soft touch.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very much you are just looking at the world. Yeah,
we're
not given like a slightly knowing perspective. You know, some of the omniscient narration books you read, the narrator will be like, and I'm going to tell you how I feel about this.
Yeah.
No.
Not there.
No.
And I think it's interesting that you said at the end you get this forecast of what happens in the future. Like, that's a little bit of narrative intervention.
Yes, and actually I'm going to just check because I have this vague memory she might change tense at the end and tell me if you remember. I'm just going to actually check the book because I think I could be. Right,
it's always the challenge of an ending. How do you end something? But it's nice to have a romance that does actually end. That's good.
Yeah, it does. It does. And the very last section, so I've said my favourite scene, changes into present tense just very much at the end.
But you see that alone, using it sparingly.
Last two paragraphs are in present tense. Yeah.
Right, and you said it was
I knew there was a tense change at the end.
But I think that is, you know, just to draw that out as just a really small thing that's had a huge impact. If she hadn't done that, if she kept the whole thing third person past tense, it probably wouldn't have been as impactful. But the fact that she made that stylistic shift right at the end did what you needed it to make it really memorable and kind of punch it home. Whereas Song of the Huntress, I think, just by all being in present tense, you just get numb to it after a point. Oh my goodness.
And I think it lacked the immediacy she wanted it to have.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it wasn't successful in that sense.
Okay, so if anyone's joined the chat and is wondering what the heck's going on, so far...
we should talk about weasels or something.
Should we? Or do a dance? No. Questions that we've addressed, and if you do want to respond, whack answers in the box. How did you feel about the book? Did you enjoy it? Big top line question.
Yes.
Who's your favourite character and why? Any other character?
Yes, anyone else who hasn't put their favourite character, please tell us. I love hearing who people's favourites were.
What was your favourite scene and why? And then we've just been talking about folkiness and magic, which we figured were actually kind of overlapped in this book, and history as well, and how well Leigh Bardugo handled those. Then we moved on to writing style, and was it right for the story? Which I guess kind of segues onto our next topic, which is what about the story? Like, what did you think of the plot? From the sounds of it, to me, it's working on some strong ideas. Underdog story, rags to riches, Cinderella kind of broad framework, mixed with a sports anime.
And a romance.
So you've got lots of different strong bits of story elements.
A potentially treacherous romance.
And in terms of other elements of the book, you've got this threat of torture. You've got that kind of religious oppression thing. Well, religious tensions, I guess, between Jewishness and Catholicism.
In a way. So what's interesting about Luthia is she's got this heritage. So she's come from a particular background. She's not really a religious person, though. So she isn't portrayed as somebody who has really any faith at all, which is super interesting. And then she's posed as a contrast to her auntie, who is actually very religious secretly and wants to get out of Spain and move to a community where she'll be safer to practice openly her faith. Luthia is she doesn't really want to do that. That's not part of who she is. And an aspect of her character I really enjoy is that she's ambitious. She has this kind of flash to her of like, actually, no, I do want to make something of my life. I want to go out with a bang if I have to. I don't just want to die in obscurity in the food cupboard. I want to do something. And I love that about her because I like characters who have ambition, you know. And it's nice that she sort of is like, no, I can make this happen. I can do this through my own efforts.
But okay, here's a question for you. Does she have any downsides or weaknesses as a character besides her humble status to start off with? Like, does she have any negative traits? Is there aspects of this character that go against the grain a little bit, or is she too good to be true?
That's really interesting. Is she too
Because
good to be true?
everything that everyone's said about her so far, to me, sounds like she's a bit of a self-insert character for people, because she doesn't think of herself as beautiful and isn't necessarily seen beautiful. I don't think many people go through their lives thinking I'm beautiful.
No.
She starts with a lower status than the one she would choose, which I think is the same as most of us.
Yeah.
So, and she has this magic power that she has, no one else has. We don't know why. She meets a perfect boyfriend. Are there any reasons to think?
Does she have any bad qualities?
Is this a fantasy in the sense of you're just getting everything you want? Or is there a sense in which Luthia maybe...
I mean, you could be killed both for who you are and your status and what you can do in terms of magic, which just definitely does not come from Jesus.
No, but
so there's that.
But for us as readers, are there things that we could possibly think, oh, she's not that good, or is she just like a...
She's quite stubborn, and she's not very acquiescent to people, which makes her not necessarily the greatest as a servant.
Yeah.
Which is kind of how people are able to play her in a way, because she will always do the slightly more self-serving, slightly more ambitious thing, and like her aunt is able to manipulate her in that way because she kind of knows that Luthia is going to walk into that trap.
So ego is
a big part of it, I think. And you know, that's actually exactly what I was saying I like about her. Because actually it was refreshing to have a character who's not afraid to have an ego.
Yeah.
Because quite often in the slightly younger ballpark, you get these kind of quite shy ingenue type heroines who are all, oh, I'm nothing special. and then
she takes off her spectacles and it's like, oh my God.
Take the hair down, take the glasses. She's hot. Yeah. And Luthia never really sees herself as pretty, actually. So she doesn't really have that, oh, I'm hot. But I mean, she feels pretty when she's
seen as beautiful,
being loved. Exactly, when she's being made to feel beautiful and adored. But yeah, there is that kind of, no, I got this. I'm good. Why shouldn't I win?
Yeah, well, that's pleasing.
I can be cleverer than the king and the Spanish Inquisition and all of them.
So there's a bit of arrogance and ego to her. Does it ever get her into trouble, or does it all work out?
I think it constantly gets her into trouble.
Well, that's great. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, she lacks circumspection, I'd say.
Sure, but I think that's a really good thing to have in a character, i.e., flaws, right? I think having any character that's too good to be true, I don't know, you're just going to
get a bit bored, don't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, you know, I guess we're talking about story, we're talking about plot. You haven't actually asked the question, do you think that it was a strong plot and narrative? I mean, you had said broadly that at the start.
I think so. I think it's a nice 5-act drama that's tidy at the end.
Okay, and in terms of themes, because that's our next question, does the book have clear themes? Were they handled well? So what are the main ideas, you would say, sitting behind the book? And a question that I'm going to ask, again, you know, I haven't read it. I'm definitely going to when I've got slightly less work on. Does it matter that she's a woman? Could she be a man? Or is femininity actually an important part of the book?
No, she could be a man, I think.
Yeah.
So one of the other contestants in the trials is a man.
Yeah.
And he fulfills a similar role, and he's actually her rival and ends up being a bit of a traitor to her, although he seems like he's a good thing. And I think she could be a boy.
That's interesting.
I'm gonna just percolate on that a little bit more, but yeah, I don't necessarily think her femininity does matter because of the existence of this other character, Fortune, who is kind of used by the upper classes in the same way. Yeah, I don't think so, because Luthia is not really sexualized. In fact, as someone just pointed out, she's like dressed to highlight her plainness rather than her sexiness.
Yeah.
One of the other contestants is this incredibly beautiful woman who is dressed to look so desirable. And Luthia is the opposite of that. So it's not like the powers that be are using her in that way. They're not exploiting her looks or her body particularly, or not at all. And so I wonder. And her magic is not. For the era, maybe it is specifically feminine magic because it's things like household magic, and women would more often be in those roles. But then again, this guy I'm talking about, this other character, he's also lower class. He's a farmer. He works with olives.
And also male servants had just as many duties as female servants in the Renaissance.
So I think you probably could change the pronouns.
That's interesting.
And you would be okay. I'm gonna, if anyone disagrees with me, I'm happy for that.
That's an interesting
Tell me why.
Because,
I think so.
when we're addressing the concept of what are the themes of the book, although we've got a female protagonist, that would imply to me that femininity and gender isn't really a theme in the book.
No, I mean, I think there are lots of great women in the book.
Yeah,
which was delightful.
Are they?
Could they have been men? Yeah, maybe.
Are there good men?
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah, good characters.
In a way, perhaps we're not talking so much about like gender being a theme.
There's maybe not such a positive male figure. Maybe. I mean, obviously, Sant'Angelo, the love interest, he's quite ambiguous through a lot of it, and he would be the first to say so. But otherwise, the other male characters are not desperately positive. Right.
Whereas we have a wider range of women in positive roles.
Yeah, and like it's a little bit more nuanced, like Valentina, for example, that we've talked about.
Yeah.
She is not very much like low-key mean girl at the beginning, but she turns into something really positive by the end.
And so she grows and changes and becomes better. That's interesting. In terms of other themes then, what are the motifs? What are the things that keep coming out? It seems to me that you've got this idea about magic, religion, folklore, and kind of spirituality. Would you say that that's a theme of the novel, or is that just stuff that's in there as set dressing? Or
I think it's probably a theme of the novel. I'm just trying to think about what I would say the overarching theme is. I think it's a critique of oppressive societies is absolutely there, and I think that's baked into the story at every turn.
So oppression.
Nobody is really living free of some sort of social oppression within this book.
So would we say oppression then is the theme?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the sort of need to conform to survive.
Yeah.
I think that's probably one of the most important things, and that's why I'm happy it has a nice positive ending in that the characters are able to get free of that.
Do you think that's realistic as a solution to the problem of oppression? Because that's part of the question, right? If it's a book that is, I'm not saying that all books have to have a moral purpose, they definitely don't, but very often when we go to literature, what we're going there for is to learn. If our main idea and our main theme is about oppression, does it actually provide us with advice to take away or moral lessons to take away to inform how we ourselves address something like oppression?
I think what it's possibly coming up with is it's better to stand up to oppression even if you die, and if you survive, that's a nice to have.
Okay, so it's saying that you've got to stand your ground no matter what.
And you've got to, and if you can outwit the oppressor, great.
Yeah. But
if you can't, at least you tried.
That's interesting. And do you agree with that? Do you think that you have to always stand up for the oppressor? Because I'm not sure I have the moral fiber or character.
No, I mean, I think that's a nice ideal. I think it's not very realistic. Yeah. I think more of us are Valentinas than Lutheas.
Yeah,
realistically.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I mean,
and there are ways, because actually the Valentina character ending, she does end up in a way living contra to the expectations of society while still existing in society. Luthia and Sant'Angelo have gone outside of society, but Valentina is very much still living in Madrid, but she has made a new life for herself in which she's opened her doors to girls and women who are in need. She's giving them an education, she's giving them a home. She's formed this sort of arts and culture based salon life for herself, got rid of her husband, and it's really positive, but she still sort of exists in the town and is part of life.
So I mean, that all does sound like it, like gender is playing a role in that.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it sounds to me a little bit like it's a kind of feminist fantasy of how things might be able to go during the Renaissance.
Yeah, sure.
Because like being brutally honest, that wouldn't happen, right?
Probably quite unlikely.
Yeah, so men had the power at this point in time, particularly in a patriarchal Catholic society. So a woman who's stepping out of her role and challenging her husband he's just going to call the guards and have her cut to pieces. Like, you know, it's quite easy for that to happen. So I think that's interesting. It's a kind of fantasy about overcoming oppression. That's interesting.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting. The kind of idea that how nice it would be.
Yes, I mean, I read not too long ago. It's a romance novel, ostensibly, but I said to Martin, this is a fantasy novel because it involved the Republican Party. No, what was it? The Democrats winning in Texas.
Oh, yeah. Red, white, and royal blue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would call that a fantasy novel because that feels like something that's never going to happen, but wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah. So if we were going to be critical, because I know you love the book, big fan, if you were going to be critical of it, would you think it would be fair to say that perhaps it has a degree of wish fulfillment and optimism?
Yes, it has a positive ending.
Yeah, that perhaps wouldn't necessarily ring as, going back to our history point, ring as realistic.
Yeah, and, you know, our sort of immortal cursed hero is able to live and exist and kind of not break the curse, but figure out a way to get around the curse.
Sure.
So yeah, I think it is a bit of a fantasy.
Because in terms of like other genre tropes, if we're talking about that concept, the text that probably leaps to mind for me would be something like Dr. Faustus, where you've got a Mephistophelian.
Oh my god, I would have absolutely loved that ending to Dr. Faustus if they had just figured out a way to just, you know, not drag Faustus to hell and Faustus and Mephistopheles live happily.
But
yes! Yeah. Oh my god, this is why I like this book. That's what I got. That's what I wanted and that's what I got.
We figured it out in the end.
Yeah, and I've learned something about myself here as well.
It's Dr. Faustus about a girl and
they stick a finger up to Lucifer at the end.
Yeah, okay, well, there we go. We nailed it.
Absolutely nailed it.
Okay, so we've still got a few minutes left. Please, any other thoughts that are coming through in the chat? In general, how did you feel about the book? Who's your favorite character and why? What's your favorite scene and why? How do you feel about the folkiness, magic, and history and how that handled in the book? Any things about style? Any things about story and plot? Anything about themes? I mean, do you feel like there was other themes that we didn't mention and address there?
I think we've talked about most of the key ones.
Yeah. All right, cool. All right, well, so we're now in a place to give the book a Raven rating. So if people want to put Raven ratings into the chat, that's cool. We, of course, go on a scale of between 0, an empty nest, and maximum of 3 glossy black ravens. Where does it fit on that sliding scale? And while people have a little muse on that idea of Raven ratings, I'm just going to throw some other questions based on what we've been talking about. So do you think Lucia had any other options but to comply with Valentina? Like, what would her life have been like if she hadn't?
I think she probably didn't have that many options. Like, she might have thrown herself on her auntie's mercy and gone, okay, what are we going to do about this? I can't live like this. Can we run away? And maybe they would have run away and lived in a different country and a different community.
Yeah.
Her auntie has no reason to do that at the start of the story because she's got things pretty much made up. She's got a wealthy patron and she is absolutely fine. She's got a very nice villa. So she could have done that. She could have also used her powers, Lucia, to get a job in a better house than Valentina's. But I think the same thing probably would have happened and she would have ended up showing her hand, as it were, and getting exploited, and it could have gone badly for her in that instance as well. So
with that idea, is magic then in this book part of a metaphor, in part a metaphor for self-expression?
Yeah, I think so, because the magic is creative. So her magic and Fortune's magic the kind of the real magic,
Yeah.
because the two other contestants, Theoda and the pretty lady whose name has temporarily escaped me, Julia maybe, they haven't got real magic.
Right.
Well, Theoda has visions, like real actual visions, possibly from God, we're not sure, but she doesn't have any real actual like tricks.
Yeah.
Whereas for Alethea and Fortune, magic is a creative act, and when they do work together in the final trial, as it were, they are going, oh, should we do this? Let me add this. And they're adding bits to each other's magic and kind of doing a whole yes and thing with magic, which is really cool.
Nice.
So yeah, it is absolutely a creative act and a form of self-expression. And Luthea's magic doesn't look like Fortune's magic. It's made differently. He draws on the power of physical things, and whereas hers comes from within her.
So, but then your point about it being inevitable that wherever she worked, whether it was for that aunt or another person, it's going to come out.
It's going to pop. I think so.
It's part of her personality to be creative.
Yeah, and she's like, her attempts to squash her personality are very unsuccessful.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so Raven's ratings, please. Anybody in the box? And one other question I guess I would have is, were there big surprises in the book?
What are the big surprises in the book? I mean, I didn't know how it was going to end.
Well, that's good.
Because quite a lot happens in the last fifth of the book, and there are lots of twists and turns. Like, oh, they're running away. They're not running away. Oh no, they've been caught. Oh God, they're okay. They're not okay.
So yes, the answer is a lot of twists.
Yeah, I think so. I think the twist of betrayal, as we shall call it, it didn't surprise me. I was suspicious about that one.
So you could see it coming down the track.
I didn't know exactly when it was coming.
Yeah.
When it came did surprise me, but I expected it to come.
Right, the fact that it happened at all wasn't a grand.
No,
wasn't a
I
grand
was
surprise.
waiting for that one.
Nice. Okay. Well, in terms of Raven rating, then, Eleanor.
I'm giving it a 3.
Yeah, you're giving it a 3.
I just really enjoyed the book. I feel like I was the target audience for the book, and I consumed it with great enjoyment.
Yeah. So is it going out to be recommended to all
I
and
have
sundry?
recommended it to everybody. Yeah, the ladies at my Pilates class have all been told they've got to read it. Not sure how well that went down, but
nice.
Definitely.
That's really cool. And obviously, Leigh Bardugo, she does write series.
This one is a standalone. She has been clear.
Yeah, she's not going to spin it out.
No, and I'm glad it is a standalone book. It doesn't need any more book. I just really hope she writes another one that's similar.
Yeah.
This is obviously a genre she has been. It feels like working up to writing, actually, because she's a writer who started when she was pretty young. Like, her first books came out, I think, when she was in her early 20s. Like, she's been at it a long time, and this book feels more mature, and I can't wait to see what she does next. I'm enjoying The Ninth House, which I know The Hellbent has come out just recently, so that's sort of on a par. But yeah, can't wait for her next one.
Excellent.
Definitely
Good.
very excited about that.
So anyone else with a Raven rating, go on, pop them in the chat, and we'll respond to those.
I feel like I've given you loads of spoilers for this book. I've deliberately avoided saying exactly what the end is.
That's all right, don't worry. I will almost certainly have forgotten what we've talked about.
That's true. By the time you get round to it, on the TBR, the to be read pile.
At the moment,
very large.
It's far too much studying and 3 Ravens reading, really, like research reading.
Folklore pile is large
and
indeed.
stuff for my dissertation, which is keeping me
keeping you nice and busy.
Yeah, nice and busy, let's say. And then in terms of next month's book,
have we chosen?
Yeah, so the voting today had it so that Cersei, Madeline
Miller Cersei. That's one I've had on the shelf for a really long time and haven't read, so looking forward to that.
So that's
obviously, I'm familiar with the legend. Yes, we don't have a date for that sorted yet.
We don't have a date yet sorted.
We will get that,
that is the next read. So we'll post up about that on social media, and obviously mention it in next week's episode, because we already recorded this week's episode. Yeah. Hope everyone's enjoying the Kent 3 Ravens episode. And yeah, thank you very much for coming to 3 Ravens Book Club. Thank you very much for your thoughts and engaging. And if you're watching this back at a later date, 2.5 ravens.
Oh, half a raven.
Yeah.
That sounds brutal. It can be a chick.
Got rid of it. Yeah, it's 2 and a chick.
Or it's got 1 leg.
Not quite perfect.
Yeah. Not quite perfect. I think that's a good rating. I would love to hear what happened to the other half.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why did it not get the full 3?
Why did not? Well, I think I'm going to be a bit frustrated by the happiness factor of how it seems to go, just from the sounds of it.
Okay.
So we'll see. I mean, I don't know, but it just seems like it all seems to go a bit too well.
Sure.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
She gets tortured, Martin.
Yeah, that's okay then.
That's not great.
Yeah, but she gets a happy ending, doesn't she?
Which she deserves after all that.
All right. Anyway, thank you, everybody. And if you are watching this back at a later date and want to send through a Ravens rating and or any thoughts, the fact that Lucia was Jewish had no impact.
Yeah, I mean, her lack of any sort of faith, I can totally see that.
So that's a good reason to lose half a
raven.
Yeah, so
totally.
it's an ornamental Jewishness.
Yeah, it's kind of knowing you've got all this heritage, but not really buying into it yourself.
And interesting that she still has magic power. That seems to be like a bit of a
that's true. She gets kind of the heritage power, but she doesn't really have the faith. What to think about that?
That's a bit of a strange dichotomy or a bit of a contradiction in terms.
And different to, I don't know if anyone else has read Naomi Novik's Spinning Silver, which you have, where the heroine's Jewishness is key to the whole story. So yeah, that's maybe how to do that right. If you haven't read that,
Elaine, I would recommend that book very
it's
strongly. It's a book that really addresses ideas like these.
Oh, do I like Spinning Silver more than this? Oh, I don't know. Well, they're on a par. They're two really good writers.
That's a book that I'm going to have to compare this one to. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. And obviously, we'll speak to you again soon through the Poddy Pod. And good luck with Circe.
Yes, enjoy. We're going back to Greece.
We're looking forward to chatting about it with you all in due course. Okay. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.